We are going to be recreating the NgRX demo application with the Firefly Semantics Slice State Manager. So we're going to go ahead and walk through a demo of what it is we're going to build. So let's go ahead and log in. The username is test and there's no password. So we'll log in and then we'll go to our menu here and we can see that we can access our collection of books here. We can browse books here and we can sign out here. So we'll go ahead and browse some books. Let's go ahead and look for Angular and we see these Angular books come up. So we'll go ahead and select one of them and we'll add it to the collection. And then we'll go and look at our collection and we can see that we now have one book in the collection. And if you click on it, we can remove it from the collection and we can go back. Here's our collection again. And then we'll look for some more books. Let's look for JavaScript and we see speaking in JavaScript. So we'll go ahead and add that to our collection and go back and here are the other books. Let's take a look at our collection. We see we now have 2 books in the collection and we can also look at the book and remove it from the collection. So we remove that one. If we go back to the collection now, we see there's only 1 book in the collection. Then we'll go ahead and sign out. We're now back at the login screen and this is what it is that we're going to build. This is the Stackblitz application that has already been built in Angular with Firefly Semantics Slice. This is what we demoed. We're going to go ahead and re-implement this by copying over the code into a brand new Stackblitz. Since this guide is about state management and specifically how it's implemented with Firefly Semantics Slice, we're mainly going to be talking about the implementation details as it relates to state management. A link to this Stackblitz and a written guide is provided in the description below. First, we'll go ahead and create a new Angular Stackblitz. So let's go ahead and click on Angular. And now we have it initialized. We have to remove the default scaffolding. So let's go ahead and click on app component.html and remove the hello component like that. And then we'll go to the app module and we'll go ahead and remove the hello component from here. There, that's clean. And now we can go ahead and delete the hello component entirely. So we'll go ahead and click here, get rid of that. And now we're ready to start implementing. Now we're going to install our dependencies. We are going to be using Angular material. So we'll go ahead, copy that, and we'll go to dependencies, go down here and just paste it in. So we're installing that. And we're also going to grab Firefly Semantics Slice. And we'll go down here. Paste that in, install that. Firefly Semantics depends on Nano ID, so we have to go ahead and install that as well. And then we'll go ahead and grab Firefly Semantics material-based module. This includes all of the components in Angular material already declared, so we don't have to declare each component one by one. That's why we're using this. So we'll go ahead and go to our dependencies, paste it in. Oops. Let's see here. Copy, paste. So there's that one. And we're going to install ngneat until destroy. And this is used to unsubscribe from our RxJS observables. So we'll go ahead and paste that in. Okay, and now we're ready. When we're using the Angular CLI, the material theme will automatically be installed for us. But since we're using Stackblitz, we're going to go ahead and copy that theme installation over like this. So we'll go here, click on styles.css, paste it in. The first thing we're going to do is create our models, and we need to create this model directory, and we're going to copy over our index.ts contents, which contains the book model, and this is the model for the books that we're going to be pulling in via the Google API. And we also have credentials and user for our authentication and security. So let's go ahead and create the models directory like that. And then we'll create index.ts. And we're going to copy over these contents like this. And that's that, model created. The next thing that we're going to create is our services. And specifically, we're going to create the app state service first. So we'll go ahead and copy this. And we'll go over here, go to app, click on a new folder, create a services folder, and then within that folder, create a file called app-state.service.ts, and we're going to go ahead and paste that in like that. So this is our application state, and the first thing we do is we define a user key, and this is used to store a user object and pull a user object from local storage. We also define an object store, and the first thing we have to do when we define an object store is create an iStart interface. And what we do here is we have three properties, one for side nav, one for user, and one for authentication error. And the initial values for these are created in the start object. And so the side nav is not open initially, that's this false value here, and the reset value is false as well. For user, we have a null value initially and a reset value of null. And for authentication error, we have false, since there are no authentication errors. And the reset is also false. And so we'll go ahead and initialize our object store here with this object. And now we have an object store. The next thing we're going to do is create some references to the observables on the object store. So the first reference we'll create is the side nav open observable, and we're just referencing the observable on the object store directly here. The same thing with authentication error. We're just going to go ahead and reference the authentication error observable for this. And for the user observable here, we're just referencing the user observable. And finally, for is logged in, this is a Boolean valued observable. So what we do here is we go ahead and map the original value to a Boolean. That way we can type this observable as a Boolean. Within our constructor, we first load the user from local storage. And if the user is not defined, then we just return null instead. Once we have a user, we go ahead and assign it to the object store using a put, and that initializes our object store with the user that we fetched from local storage. And the way this works from an application point of view is that it simulates continuous authentication. And so if you log into the application, use it, close the window, and don't log out, the next time you come back to the application, the user will be loaded from local storage. And so you'll be seeing that you're already logged in to the application. When we first log in by clicking the login button, it'll call this update user method, and we'll pass in the user here. And then we'll go ahead and put that user in the object store, and we'll also write the user to local storage. When we log out, we're going to go ahead and set the user on the object store to null, and we'll also write null to local storage, and that logs us out. If there is an authentication error, which will happen if you type anything other than test in the username field on the login component, then we'll go ahead and call this set authentication error method with a Boolean value, and we'll go ahead and put that into the object store using a put, and that will trigger an authentication error display inside the login component. We also have a toggle side nav utility method down here, which is called whenever we open and close the side nav. And the way we model this state is we just say that the value for the side nav, which is a Boolean value, is the inverse of what it was previously whenever we click on the side nav to open or close it. And so we just take a snapshot of the state, and so if that's false, it'll be turned to true, and if it's true, it'll be turned to false. Now you may be wondering, why are we storing the side nav state in the object store? Couldn't we just put that on the component itself? And we could. But the reason it's nice to have this state inside the object store or in a central location is we may have other pieces of the user interface that also depend on this state. For example, if we wanted to implement something that opens when we close the side nav, then we have something to trigger that now. And that is why we have that inside the object store. The next service that we're going to implement is the Auth guard service, and this service is responsible for guarding our application from access if we're not already authenticated. So we're going to go ahead and copy this and go over to our new application and type auth-guard.service.ts, and we'll paste in the contents, and here it is. And so we have this canActivate function. And this function is called by the Angular router to check whether we are authenticated, which is indicated by the isLoggedIn $ observable reference on the state service. And so it checks this reference to see if we're logged in. If we're not logged in, then it reroutes us to the login component. But if we are logged in, it allows us to have access to the application since we're returning an observable indicating that we are logged in or of true. The auth service is the service that logs us in and logs us out. So we'll go ahead and create that by copying, and then we'll go to services, click on new, and type in auth.service.ts, paste in the contents, and we see here that we inject the state service in the constructor, and we also inject the Angular router. And the login function takes a username and a password. If the username is not the same as test, then we set the authentication error on the state service. And if we are logged in, or if the username is okay, that username is test, then we go ahead and set the authentication error to false. We update the user by calling update user, passing the username, and we navigate to the root point of the application using the router navigate function. When we log out, we go ahead and call update user without a username, and we navigate to login. And that's it for the auth service. The book service is the service that contains two entity stores. One for managing the books that we load via the query, that is the bookstore, and one for the book collection that we use to manage the books in our collection. So we'll go ahead and create this service by copying it over. So we'll come here, create a new service, say book.service.ts, and we'll paste that in like that. Within our bookstore service, we're first going to create an API endpoint reference that we are querying for our books. That's that. And we're going to create two book entity stores. One for the books that we are querying and fetching from the API, and another one for the collection. And that's this one. We'll also create two observable references to the corresponding reference on each store, just so that we have slightly shorter access, although we could have used the reference on the entity store directly. Within our constructor of the book service, we go ahead and inject the Angular HTTP client. And the way we search for books is our bookstore has a query property on it. And when we type inside the search field, we're going to go ahead and set that query property on the bookstore. That in turn will trigger the bookstore's query observable, and we pipe that as observable through filter first to make sure that the query is defined, and then we debounce it using 200 milliseconds, and then we check that it's distinct, and finally we tap into the event using tap, and we call the search API method that is defined below. And that'll search for books and return an observable containing the results. We then take that observable and use toPromise to turn it into a promise, and then we await it so that we get our actual array of books. We then call reset on the bookstore, which empties it completely, and we post the new array of books into the bookstore, and that populates it. And finally, we call subscribe on this newly defined observable, and this puts our application in a state where it's ready to accept bookstore queries. The Onsearch method within our book service is the method we use to bind to the search field. So whenever the user types in the search field, it triggers the Onsearch method that accepts the query, and then we go ahead and bind that query to the query property on the bookstore, which will trigger the search. The search API method on our service is what we use to actually search for Google Books. So it uses the Angular HTTP client and performs a GET request. And in here, we include the query inside the query string that we're passing into the GET method. And this will return an object. And we map that object to the object's items because that is the set of books that we're interested in. And if that isn't defined, then we just return an empty array. We're also defining a getById method, and this calls the Angular HTTP client and just wants a single book. So we're just mapping in the volume ID here into our search string, and it's going to return an observable containing a single book. We also have a toggle collection function that takes a book as an argument, and all it does is it calls toggle on our book collection, and if the book is in the collection, it'll remove it, and if the book is not in the collection, then it'll add it to the collection. The service that we're going to define is the book resolver service, and we have that here. Let's go ahead and copy that in, go over to our application and click on New. And we'll type book-resolver.service.ts, and we're going to paste that in. The resolver service is triggered when we try to navigate to a book path using an ID. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and inject the router and the book service using the constructor. And then we'll go ahead and use the parameter map to look up the ID for the book. Once we have the ID, we're going to use find one by ID on the bookstore, passing in the ID, and that may return the book that we're looking for. If the book is not available in the store, then we're going to go ahead and use the book service to look it up using the API. If that returns the book, then we'll go ahead and return the book to the caller. If it's not available, or if there was an error, then we navigate to the 404 page, and that's how our book resolver service works. Now that we have all our services defined, we're going to go ahead and define our pipes. And the first pipe that we're going to define is the commas pipe. And this pipe is used to format the array of authors as a string so we can display it. So we'll go ahead and copy this, and we'll go over to our application and create a pipes folder. And then within the pipes folder, we'll create a new pipe called commas.pipe.ts, and we'll paste in the results. Here that the way our authors pipe works is that if we have 0 authors, we go ahead and return author unknown. If we have 1 author, and then we just return it. If we have 2 authors, we go ahead and combine the 2 using AND. And if we have more than 2, then we're going to get the last author from the array, and we're going to get the remaining authors. And what we'll do is we'll combine the remaining using a comma. And finally, we'll put an AND at the end of that string and combine it with the last author. And that's how our commas pipe works. All right, we also need to bring over our ellipsis pipe. So we'll go ahead and open that and copy it and go here and then click on New. And we'll type ellipsis.pipe.ts and copy in the results. So the way the ellipsis pipe works is we pass in a string, which in our case is the title of the book. And first we clean it up to make sure it doesn't have any HTML in it. And then if the string length is greater than 250 characters, we go ahead and abbreviate it and add 3 dots at the end. And that's how our ellipsis pipe works. Now that we have our model, our services, and our pipes defined, we can go ahead and start defining our components. And the first component we are going to define is the authors component. And so we'll grab that and we'll go to our application and create a components folder. And then within that folder, we're going to create a book folder. And within that, we're going to create our authors components. There. And we'll paste in the code. And we can see that all this component does is display our book authors. So it takes the book as an input property, and it has this method to go ahead and get the authors from the book. And then we can see up here in our template that the authors are run through the commas pipe, and that is what creates our book authors display for us. The next component is the book detail component. So we'll go ahead and grab that and create book-detail.component.ts. We'll paste in the contents. The book detail component is a presentation component, and so it has 2 inputs, one for the book itself and one for whether the book is in the collection or not. That's here. And it also has 2 event emitters. And so we have an add event emitter, and that'll fire when we add the book to a collection, and a remove event emitter, and that'll fire when we remove the book from the collection. We also have some utility getters for ID, title, subtitle, description, and thumbnail that is all used in the template. And we also have a go back method, which is just used to trigger going back when we hit the back button within the component. All right, we can see here that the book detail template has a lot of content display, and so we won't walk through all of this. But if you have any questions, just leave me a comment and I'll make sure I'll get back to you. Our next component is the book collection component. So let's go ahead and grab that and copy it. So we'll go to books and type in collection.component.ts and paste in the contents. All right, so we see down here that in the constructor, the collection component injects the book service, and then it finds the books in the collection by observing the book collection observable, and it pipes that through until destroyed, so that when the component is destroyed, the subscription is also destroyed. And then up here in the template, we delegate the display of each book to the book preview list component, and the template also has a title for the collection up top. Our next component is the preview list component, and this is the component that we use to render the list of books inside the collection component. So we'll go ahead and grab that, and we'll create a new component, preview-list.component.ts, and paste in the results. The book preview list component takes the array of books that it displays as an input, and then within its template, it iterates through all the books and displays each book, delegating that to the book preview component. Moving on to the book preview component, we see that here. We'll go ahead and grab the contents and create it. Preview.component.ts, and we'll copy that in. All right, the book preview component has the book as an input property, and it also has multiple utility getter methods for things like the ID, title, subtitle, and so on. And the template is fairly straightforward, but if you have any questions on it, please leave me a comment and I'll make sure I get back to you. Next up, we have the search component. So we'll go ahead and grab the contents and go to books, create search.component.ts, paste that in. All right, the book search component takes the book service as a constructor injected service, and it has a search method that receives the input event that we trigger when typing in the search field. And we first get the element that's tied to that event, and then from the element we get the value that we are searching for, and we call the Onsearch method on the book service using that value. The template of the search component has a key up event here that calls the search method, and we pass in the search event here, and that is what triggers the search function. We also bind the value of this input to the bookstore's query property. That way, if we've done a query previously and we navigate back to this component, the component will remember the previous query and it'll display the results from that query. Also at the bottom here, we grab the books that we want to display in preview from the book service books observable. The last component in our book folder is the Viewbook Component. So we'll go ahead and grab that, copy it, and create a new component in our book folder, viewbook.component.ts, and we'll paste that in. So as we can see here, this component displays the details of each book, and it delegates those details to the book detail component. And so we can see that we assign the book using the book property, whether it's in the collection or not, using the in collection property that is initialized via the is selected book in collection observable that's on this component. We also have two event emitters, one called add and one called remove. And these will add and remove the book from the collection correspondingly. In our Viewbook Component constructor, we go ahead and inject the activated route and also the book service. And we have a book property that is assigned to the book detail component and is used to initialize that component with the details of each book. We also have a is selected book in collection observable that is used to indicate whether the book is in our collection or not. The bookstore is initialized using the reference on the book service. And we do the same thing with our book collection. We grab the reference from our book service. We assign the book property using the snapshot on our route. And the way the book gets assigned to the route is via our book resolver service that we created when we created our services. The active state on our bookstore is initialized by first using clear active to clear the active state on the bookstore. And then we go ahead and use add active to add the book to the active state of the store. Also, the isSelectedBook in collection observable is initialized by using the book collection observable, piping it through map, and then we check whether the book collection contains the book. And that's how we create the isBook in collection observable state. Lastly, we have a toggle collection method, and this method calls toggle on our book collection with the book. And so if the book is not in the collection, then we add it. If the book is in the collection, we remove it. We are done with all the books in the book folder. Next, we're going to do our core components, and we'll first start with the login component and copy that, go over to our components, create the core folder, and then we'll go ahead and create the login component and paste it in. On our login component, we have a material form here that we use to get the user ID and password. And we also bind to the authentication error observable on our application state. And if the error fires, then we go ahead and display an error message. The login component has an error message property down here that we use to display our error message. This is the form group that we use to log in with. And in the constructor, we inject the application state service and also the auth service that is used to log in. And when the user clicks login, we go ahead and delegate the login to the auth service, calling login on it. So we're going to bring over our nav item component. So we'll go ahead and copy and go to our core components and create nav-item.component.ts. Paste that in. The nav item component displays each nav item in our side nav, and it takes the router link and uses that for navigation, and that's an input on the component. We also have an icon input on the component that we display here, and it also takes a hint that we render here. And we can see our inputs down here, the router link, the hint, and the icon. And we also have an event emitter that we fire when we navigate. We'll bring over the not found component. So we'll go ahead and click on the not found, copy it, and go in here, create a new component, not-found.component.ts, paste it in. Up is the side nav, and that's here. We'll go ahead and grab that and bring it over. Create a new component, side-nav.component.ts, and paste it in. And this is pretty straightforward as well. We have a nav list, and we put our nav item components inside the ng content of this component. And we have a single input, which is indicating to the component whether it's open or not. Next, we'll bring in the side nav components. So we'll go ahead and copy that, go to our core components, create a new component, side nav.component.ts, and paste in the contents. And this is pretty straightforward. We have a side nav, and the nav list is populated using an ng content. And then down here we have an input that indicates whether the component is open or not. And that's it for our side nav. The last component that we're going to be bringing over is the toolbar component. So we'll go ahead and copy it and click on core, click on new, toolbar.component.ts, paste it in. And we see here that the toolbar just has an open menu event emitter that we use to trigger the open and closing of the side nav. And it has an ng content here that we use to display the content on the toolbar. And it also has a button that we're using to trigger the opening and closing of the side nav. And that has the menu icon here. Now that we are done with all our components, we can go ahead and create our modules. And the first module that we are going to be creating is the pipes module, because it's imported by the books module. And so we want to go ahead and create this first. So we'll go ahead over to our app, click on the app folder, create a modules folder, And then within this modules folder, we'll go ahead and create pipes.module.ts and paste in the pipes module. And we can see here that all this module does is it creates an array of the commas pipe and ellipsis pipe, and it declares that on the declarations and the exports properties of our ng module. Now that we have our pipes module, we can go ahead and create the books module. So we'll go ahead and copy that, come to our module, create book.module.ts, paste in the book module. The book module is a lazy loaded module that we load when we access our application. And so we can see here that we're importing all of the components within our book folder. And we're also going to bring in the book service and the book resolver service. And it has its own set of routes. And so we have a route for the book search component that is on the default path, a collection route for the collection component, and we have an ID route that we use to access books by ID. And when we do that, we use the book resolver service to look up the book so that it's available to the component when it renders. And we see we have our imports block here where we declare all the modules that we need, and we have a declaration section where we declare all our components, and the providers are the book service and the book resolver service. The last module we need to bring in is the core module. So we'll go ahead and copy it and create core.module.ts and paste that in. So as we can see here, the core module brings in all our main application components like the login component, the nav, the side nav, and the toolbar. And we've declared these in an array here. And we go ahead and pass that to our declarations property on our ng module. And we also bring in all of the modules that this module depends on. Next, we're going to bring over our app routing module. So let's go ahead and copy that. Go to our app folder, create app-routing.module.ts, and we'll paste in the contents. And as we see here, the default path in the app routing module redirects to the book path, and the books path lazy loads the book module like this, and it also has a can't activate guard, which means we have to be authenticated before we can access this path. We also have our login component declared here, and then we have a for root declaration on our router module within the imports block, and we have our exports as the router module. The last module that we need to create is the app module. So we'll go ahead and just copy over the contents like this. And as we can see here, we're bringing in our browser modules, the forms modules, and all of the modules that we've declared earlier, like the core module, our app routing module, and the material base module containing all of our Angular components. We also declare our app component in the declarations block, and we have our app component being bootstrapped. Our app module declared, and now we need to create our app component. And so we'll go ahead and copy those contents over. Click on app-component.ts and just paste over it. And we see here that the app component injects the router, the app state service, and the auth service. And when we sign in, we use the app state service to toggle the side nav so that it disappears after we sign in, and then we use the router to navigate to the login screen. When we log out, we toggle the side nav again with the state service, and we call logout on the auth service, and then we navigate to the login screen using the router. So need to copy over our shell template. So we'll go ahead and grab that, and we're just going to copy over app.component.html like that. All right, the first nav item in our shell is the sign-in item, and we have an event emitter here called navigate that, when triggered, calls the sign-in method. And we also only show this nav item if we're not already logged in, and that is indicated by the is logged in observable on our application state service. Next nav item is the my collection nav item, and when we click on navigate, we're going to go ahead and toggle the side nav, and we only display this item if we're already logged in, and that is indicated by the is logged in observable on our application state service. The router link goes to books collection, and the icon is the book icon, and the hint is view your book collection. This is the Browse Books Nav item, and when we click on it, we fire the toggle side nav on the state service, and that closes the side nav for us. We also only show this if we're already logged in. The router link routes us to books, and we use the search icon, and the hint is find your next book. Our last nav item is the sign out nav item. So when we click on it, it logs us out, and we only display this if we're signed in. So lastly, within our shell, we have the toolbar. And when we click on the open menu event emitter, we go ahead and toggle the side nav so that it opens. And we also have a router outlet for displaying our components. The very last thing we need to do before we can boot our application is add the material icons to index.html. So go ahead and copy that, and then go to index.html and just copy over it. And now we see that we've added a link to material icons up here, and that's going to load our icons that we use for the nav items and the opening and closing of the side nav and so on. And that's it. We are now done with the application, and we can go ahead and boot it up, log in, search for books, click on them, add them to our collection, and so on. I'll let you go ahead and play around with that at your leisure. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial as much as we enjoyed making it. And if you have any questions or comments, please leave them and I will make sure to get back to you. And please give us a like and a thumbs up, and thank you for supporting the channel.